see everyone. Thanks so much for being here. This is one of my favorite events of the year. It's been a while since we've been able to get together. I think the last time I was like handing out big paddles on stage for an award ceremony. So welcome back. Exciting to have everyone at home and in person, and really delighted to be in conversation with Felecia. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Twin Cities. Is this your first trip here, I have to ask you?
No, I lived here for like a year and a half, a long time ago. But I'm a Florida girl, so I didn't survive very long. Yeah, I'm a Florida girl, so I didn't survive very long here. But I lived here for a year and a half, maybe about 13 or 14 years ago.
Okay, amazing. Well, you came during the right time. Don't ever visit us in February. It's lovely to see you. So I wanted to just start off by asking Felecia to share a little bit about her entrepreneurial story because it is really inspiring. And you kick off a lot of your talks talking about being a C student, going all the way to the CEO, which I think resonates with a lot of founders and a lot of folks in our ecosystem of, school, whatever, but, let's start our own thing. So share a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, definitely. It was a C student in high school for sure. Had a guidance counselor tell me I'd never make it to a college or a university. I was one of those kids who taught themselves how to code at 16 and 17 and could rewire the cable to my room when my parents bought me a TV for Christmas, but they wouldn't put cable because they didn't really want me to watch that much TV. And I figured out how to rewire the cable into my room to have freedom and all of those things. And so, but that didn't translate into what was happening in the classroom. But I think someone said that earlier, just being very curious, it was a very curious teenager. But I also had someone at 17 who did not know me try to define what the rest of my life was going to look like by telling me that I'd never make it to a college or a university. You should just try and go to a vocational school or try to get a job. And I'm just like, not even community college, they have programs to accept almost everybody. And so for me, that was that moment of are you going to take this limiting belief that someone's projecting onto you, or are you going to use it as a challenge to kind of prove themselves wrong, but then step up and rise to the occasion? And so that's what I did. I ended up winning $130,000 in scholarships as a C student in high school. My GPA never touched a 3.0, maybe on the way down, but not on the way up, right? But that was I learned some of the biggest lessons about personal marketability, about technology, about never giving up, right? Or the first yes when you're selling something has to be to yourself. I learned all of those really big lessons as a high school student. And then it really just kind of shaped everything, right? And I think the other biggest lesson is there's more than one pathway to success. And everyone was telling me this is the only way. And if you ever fall off track, there's no hope for you. And I'm at 17? And that fueled how I ran an educational consulting company when I was in college. It sounded much more sophisticated than it really was. But my mom's friends just started asking me, can you show our kids how to do the same thing that you did as a C student and winning a ton of scholarship money, right? And I turned it into a company, not even realizing I was turning it into a company, but my mom was just you gotta start charging something because you're spending a lot of time doing this. And so I learned a lot of those lessons in those early days, but I think everything that we did with Code Fever, which I co-founded with my husband, Derek here, Black Tech Week, the Center for Black Innovation, was always on this premise is there's more than one pathway to success. And making sure that young people and diverse entrepreneurs always are saying yes to themselves when they're constantly surrounded by people that are saying no to them, their possibility, their innovation potential, their communities, and their trajectory. Those lessons that I learned at 17 have shaped everything.
Talk a little bit about that, because I think limiting beliefs is something that is really important for founders to understand that those are coming from external factors, right? And then we embody them often. And that's true for Black founders in particular. That's true for women in particular. What are some of those steps that you took? And maybe it was just that journey. But if you're talking to an entrepreneur and saying, hey, whatever you're putting on yourself, that's a limiting belief. How do you help someone through that? And what are maybe some of those steps to realization?
Yeah, the longest, hardest, most difficult and judgmental conversations that we have are with ourselves every single day. And, when we think about opportunities, when we think about more positive outlook, we have to also think about abundance. You know, we think as human beings, most of us, that abundance is something that we create, but like abundance is actually all around us. What we as human beings create are limitations that stop us from accessing the things that clearly are around us, right? Then I think from a systemic issue, like there are humans that also create massive limitations that stop others from being able to fully actualize their dreams, especially as it relates to entrepreneurship. And that's a whole other problem hopefully we dig into, right? But I think as individuals, as entrepreneurs, as dreamers, as innovators, like we are building something by nature, right? Like that is something that is innately in us. Like that is a force that we are battling with in a brilliant way. But it's, you know, I will tell people like, hey, what abundance books are you reading? And I'm not trying to sound all like Oprah Super Soul Sunday-ish, but it's true. Like, what are you feeding yourself with every day to combat all the messages that are telling you that you should not do this? You cannot do this. How dare you do this? And they're all around us, right? Like, I mean, I've worked in marketing and advertising for a long time, but like those are some of the biggest perpetrators of the negative messaging and talking about our inadequacy. Why? Because they're trying to sell you something. So they have to tell you that there's a problem that exists with you first in order to then sell you the solution. And if they're gonna continue to make money, they gotta constantly tell you that there are constantly problems, so you keep buying the product off the shelf, right? And so as humans, we have to have a level of like fortitude as we go out every single day. And so who are you? And it's the basic stuff, right? I think we're always looking for like, who's the next guru, or like, what's the next solution? Like, no, what are you reading? Like, how are you feeding yourself? Who are you surrounding yourself with? What intentions are you setting with the time that you have? Because time is the biggest commodity that we will not ever get back. So don't let people waste your time. And then are you clear with your vision? Because a chaotic mind will make either poor choices or no choices at all. And that is also the thing that constantly gets us in this state of feeling lack, right? And then just constantly looking for opportunities and how to be of value for others as well are some of the things that have really helped me over the years.
Oh, that's so helpful. And abundance is one of the Coven's like founding principles. It's in our values statement. And I think until you have experienced that level of abundance within an organization or within yourself, it's hard to imagine not feeling lack or not feeling like you're chasing something. And one of the things that you talk a lot about in your talks and in some of your courses that you offer is the idea of focus and finding a clear vision and taking those steps towards your dreams. And you were a entrepreneur who then started created an entrepreneurial ecosystem. Talk about Black Tech Week in Miami and kind of that process of being the entrepreneur and then supporting the entrepreneurs.
I mean, we started Code Fever first, and my husband and I were running a food company in Miami, and we wanted to train our employees that were from like the Overtown and Liberty City area of Miami to have like the most marketable skills possible. Like, we knew that they weren't gonna be in the gourmet popsicle business forever. We also weren't gonna be in the gourmet popsicle business forever, but we really cared about our employees that were all like high school students. And so we started this organization called Code Fever, kind of, you know, as a really just kind of and something that we wanted to give back to our community. And it literally was only supposed to be one day. Like one day just for our employees, like bring your friends and family. We were expecting like 20 people. We got a bunch of our friends that were like in the Miami tech ecosystem that was literally just sprouting up at the time. And like Wilfredo, who founded like Lab Miami, which was literally like Miami's first co-working space, he was the one who actually named our organization. He was just like, you want to teach kids how to code? Your company right now is called Feverish, Code Fever. I'm like, yeah, that works. So yeah. Brian Burkeen, who's like you know, an investor and entrepreneur, like he spoke there. I'm trying to think of who. We just got a bunch of our friends together, bought pizza, got laptops through like a tweet from a friend that was with Dell, like just all the random stuff of what entrepreneurs do just coming together. I need all these things. And it was literally supposed to be one day. We only expected 20 people, like over 80 people showed up. And we were just like, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? I mean, it was a fantabulous day, but then we were bombarded with calls for weeks, like, when are you doing this again? And we're like, we're not. Like,
it's like an employee
y'all were
thing.
supposed to get in where you fit in with this day, get the inspiration and go along. And my husband and I are Echo and Green Fellows, which is probably one of the longest standing social impact, like fellowships, right? Like Michelle Obama was a Echo and Green Fellow. The founder of City Year is an Echo and Green Fellow. And so inside Echo and Green, in the fellowship, they oftentimes talk about your moment of obligation. And that is what happened for myself and my husband. Like, we were running a company, we were getting all the invites. We also didn't see other people that looked like us that were getting the invites. But we knew so many really amazing people that just had their head down and they were building companies. And we all realized that that is not the way that you raise funding or build companies, by just having your head down and build your company. Like, you have to have community, and you have to have a level of access, and then you have to then know how to navigate proximity to power and wealth, and these are all things that we had to learn. And so the moment of obligation is when you see something much bigger than yourself, and you ask, if not me, then whom? And if you have all the resources, or you can reach out and touch the resources, and you don't do anything with it, are you okay as a human, as a global citizen, to continue to see that problem fester? And if you cannot live with yourself seeing that problem fester, then that is your moment of obligation to do something about it. And that's what happened with myself and my husband. We were just like literally kind of running away from our biggest contribution, right, to Miami and to what we've done across the nation. We were running away from it for a long time, because now we're busy. Like, we're trying to pay the bills, we're trying to keep things afloat, but there was this thing and this kind of pull that kept coming to us, and that was Code Fever. And I'm telling you that because we had to start Black Tech Week, because what we realized by teaching young people how to code in the early days, and again, this was the Miami startup ecosystem was just sprouting up. It also was not inclusive of the Black and brown community at all. And I say that and people kind of scratch their head, because they're like, Miami is a minority majority community, but like the low income Hispanic community was also being left out of the resources of the ecosystem that was just sprouting up. And those were the young people that we were training: African American, Caribbean youth, and then low income Hispanic students. And so we started that program, and then we realized we didn't want to be a train and pray organization, meaning we were training young people on like how to code, how to navigate startup ecosystems as people of color, digital literacy. And then we could not actually ensure that there was a job for them, an internship opportunity, or a pathway for them to build their own startup. We couldn't ensure that. And if you're not careful, even with your best intentions, you end up doing more harm than good. And so we started Black Tech Week as like, if not any time in Miami, we can guarantee there was 1 week that like investors, maybe your next co-founder, right? Dreamers, corporations, like we can have emerging technology conversations as people, like we can ensure that during 1 week. Like that was literally the goal. And it expanded from there, but we had to start Black Tech Week because the ecosystem needed that, and we needed to create pathways. And then from there, we were like, we need a space, right? We were having the WeWork conversation earlier of that, like, we were members of the first WeWork in Miami, which was on Miami Beach. Sounds amazing. I'm just like, for $300, I can like practically sleep in this space. Like I can work 24 hours and there's fruit water and Coke, like all this stuff, right? And I'm just like, how transformational would that be for a Black entrepreneur in Overtown or Liberty City to be able to have an amazing, impressive place of business for $300 a month? And like that became what started making us like the idea kind of circle and percolate of like, well, we should build a space like that. And so we built a 10,000 square foot space called, at the time it was called Space Called Tribe, and it was a play on Tribe Called Quest, and there's Tribe Called Quest lyrics in the building. And then we renamed the organization to the Center for Black Innovation about almost three years ago now.
Congratulations. I mean, give her a round of applause for all of that work, hard work. I think it's interesting that you listened to the call that was coming to you over and over and over again, because so many entrepreneurs, and we've seen them in our own ecosystem, like opt out after a while because it can be exhausting. And I want to just say hats off to Shalisa for creating and continuing this event. So, round of applause for Shalisa.
Big round of applause.
I really do think, this event and these events for Twin Cities Startup Week have really evolved from where they were years ago, where, I was the only Black person, the only Black woman, the only woman in the room, and they've really evolved to be a really diverse group of speakers, diverse audience, and really prioritizing the needs of our most, underrepresented and underserved communities. And so I'm really excited about where this is going, and it sounds like very similar to where you've been in Miami. And I would be curious to know too, like, what is the call then to bring this national, right? So you started really focused on your ecosystem with Black Tech Week. Where did that go into now Black Ambition?
So we expanded the conference to 8 other cities across the U.S. Like Knight Foundation has been a big partner of our work from the very beginning, and it allowed us to expand it, as a week over, I think it was 6 years that we ran it in Miami. And then we did a road show, right, and took it to 8 other cities. And we always had a commitment to do like the full week in Miami. Like we would never take that anywhere else. Was our plan. And so we created like a 2-day version of that we would take to other cities. And so that was Black Tech Weekend, and we did 8 cities with that across the nation with some really, really great partners. But then just a lot of impact, right? You think of Play.vs, which is an esports company that has gone on to raise over $100 million. Like he met his first investor at Black Tech Week in Miami,
wow.
Right?
Results,
yeah. Right? And so, not only helping like hundreds of people get placed into really great tech companies or start their own companies, but getting them access to capital, were some of the amazing results that have happened out of Code Fever as well as Black Tech Week, right? And so expanding it across the nation was something that we always wanted to do. And I think when we talk about attracting the right type of talent, that was a dream of Derek and I that we just could not make happen ourselves until we found like a really good event producer that allowed us, like literally allowed our vision to come to life and be able to bring it to other cities. And so we sold Black Tech Week at the top of this year.
Congratulations.
Thank you, to Lightship Foundation. And they just did their big Black Tech Week in Cincinnati in July. And so it was like kind of coming full circle in this really meaningful way. But I think if you talk about like COVID and those 2 years really kind of reflect on where you want to go as an organization, the impact that you want to have, and then also getting to a point where like you've built something and you truly realize like you are at the fullest extent into what you can do with it, right? And trusting it enough for it to be in someone else's hands and see them take the vision into places that we just didn't think of, or we didn't imagine, or we didn't have the freedom and space because we were doing so many things. And so that for us, in like being in Cincinnati, was like a full circle moment around all of that. But one thing that I wasn't able to do in the 7 years of running Black Tech Week, Center for Black Innovation, alongside my husband, was like directly invest in entrepreneurs. And so we created pathways. We were able to make the introductions. We were able to get funding and then support those entrepreneurs. But to be able to make direct investments, I wasn't personally able to do that. And it's a very important piece in building a really strong and healthy ecosystem. And so when the opportunity presented itself to build this thing for Pharrell, I would love to say that I said yes really easily. I didn't, because we had just rebranded to the Center for Black Innovation. We had just brought on some really new partners. I knew it was time for me to transition from the organization. Like, I knew that, right? And I think when you pivot, and I think in the startup community, we talk so much about pivoting, and we just kind of brush it off as this thing you do while you're brushing your teeth. And we don't talk about the conversations that you have to have with yourself about stepping into a new version of yourself. Or who are you when you were no longer known as this thing that you have been birthing and building for years. And like that was a full year process for me. And then I'm like, I'm ready. Like I could finally say it out loud to myself that I'm like, I'm ready to move on and explore something else. And then, I went to therapy for 3 months because I needed to build up the courage to then have that conversation with other people, partners, right? Funders, my team, my husband, you know what I mean? And so like, I think we have to normalize that part of the process in the startup community as well. And those were some steps that I went through. And so when I got asked to come lead this thing, I was just like, wait, what? Like, it was literally a meeting and then a phone call later that after, like, do you want to be the CEO? I'm like, the CEO of what? And they were like, yeah, you had all this stuff to say about all these things that we should change and fix, so like, why don't you come run this thing? I was just like, maybe, yeah, let me think, like literally, let me think about that. And, had a lot of conversations with my husband who was just like, you'd be absolutely crazy to like not take this thing. But it's still a transition when you pivot nonetheless. But, I talk oftentimes about like intention. So I don't do New Year's resolutions. I don't do like big goal setting at the beginning of the year. What I do is I set an intention for the year. And by setting the intention, I want that intention to flow through all aspects of my life. And so for 2 years, I had the same intention, which was flow. I wanted more flow and ease into my life in all aspects of everything that I was doing. From the flow of impact to the flow of my schedule, to the flow of my marriage, to the flow of like managing all the crazy things with our kids. Like I wanted flow in all aspects of that. And when that position presented itself, it had all the pieces of what flow would mean for me, but then also being able to directly invest in entrepreneurs. And so we invested in 34 really brilliant, amazing Black, Latinx, and HBCU startups last year. Those companies have gone on to raise over $60 million in just the past year alone, which is just fantastic, amazing, right? Yeah. And then we've just been able to bring in some really, really great partners as well, right? And so like Jonah Peretti, the founder of BuzzFeed, is a mentor in our program. He mentored like 4 HBCU students. I was like, I could not even fathom being a freshman in college and coming up with a business idea, which I did, and then like the founder of BuzzFeed calling me every other week. Like that's a testament to making sure that we are delivering access, right? And then when we talk about mentorship, which is extremely important, but oftentimes like Black and brown founders are over-mentored and underfunded. Like it's our goal to give them both at the highest level possible because both are needed, and then get the heck out the way, right? And so like that is really kind of like our philosophy with Black Ambition, is funding them at a highest level, giving them a level of access, giving them a level of proximity to power and also proximity to wealth, showing them how to navigate that, right? And get very comfortable with money, healing their toxic relationship with money, because that is not talked about enough in the startup space. It's just, why aren't you asking for $10 million?
Yeah,
well,
we discount ourselves, right?
We've discounted ourselves, but then we have grown up with years and generations of predatory financial everything in our communities. And so the most immediate thing to do is distrust, which is very valid. And the most immediate thing to do is to devalue who we are and what we're actually building. And you gotta unlearn all of that before you can then come play in this space and really be able to succeed and understand what you're building and what the true valuation can be. And like more programs need to be centered around healing that toxic relationship with money first, so then you can really go out and get the bag.
You talk a lot, I mean, gosh, you've really pivoted. We call it at the Coven, we say we're pirouetting because it's beautiful. But in order to pirouette, you have to have a really solid foundation, solid focus in where you're going. Otherwise, you're just a tornado spinning into the ether. And where you have, pirouetted and spun to is, economic impact across the world. And so I'm curious to hear a little bit about kind of Black ambition and how entrepreneurship can actually solve a lot of our racial wealth gap problems. There's many, right, and many institutions that uphold, racism and racist practices. But how is it that Black ambition is really changing the way that ecosystems work and closing racial wealth gaps through entrepreneurship?
And so, my mentor always says to me, like, money screams, but wealth whispers. And we often, and all of us talk about like the wealth gap and closing the wealth gap. And the only way to do that, or the initial very important steps in doing that, is making sure that money wealth screams so that we can hear it and apply it, right? But I think people patronize people that don't have proximity to wealth or actually have wealth so much. It's just like, just keep your head down and work hard, and eventually you'll be able to create generational wealth. It doesn't work like that. It does not work like that at all. And we keep wasting people's time, and wealth has a need for speed, right? And so we have to be able to get them access to money, to real money, faster, so that capital can be deployed, so that they can hire more people, so that they can actually build stronger, more profitable companies faster. We have to stop BSing people, right? Especially Black and brown founders, because they have all the potential in the world to build extremely wealthy companies, and we've seen that when they're giving the resources that they absolutely need. And so with Black Ambition, the best way that I can describe like that process for us is a conversation that I had with Pharrell when I first started. And it was a conversation that I had with Pharrell and then also Virgil, who was one of our board members before he passed last year. And I don't know, has anyone seen Lovecraft Country on HBO? Right, good, because I wish more of y'all have seen it, because it's a really hard show to explain. It's a sci-fi series by Jordan Peele. And it came out like at the height, like at the beginning of the pandemic, around the same time Tiger King came out, which is, random but a coincidence all at the same time.
If you had
right?
a choice, I would have hoped you chose
I
Lovecraft
chose both.
Country.
I chose both, like
both.
everyone, right?
You're chaos.
What else can I watch to escape whatever is happening right now? And so I don't remember if it's episode 4 or 5. I should go back and watch it at this point. But there's 2 characters in this show, episode 4 or 5, and Christina is a white woman that has all these mystical powers. She can make people appear and disappear and like do all these things. And Ruby is a Black woman in the show that doesn't feel like she has any power. She feels quite powerless. And Christina turns to Ruby and she asks her this question that I've never forgotten, right? It's probably been one of the most impactful questions in my life. And Tony Robbins says, the quality of your questions determine the quality of your life. And so you have to ask bigger, richer, more expensive, more expansive questions of yourself, of the people around you, so that you can know what your next best move should be. And so the question that Christina asked Ruby is, who were you uninterrupted? And when I heard that question, I was just like, whoa. Like, I never heard that question before in my entire life. I've worked for some of the biggest companies in the world, Nintendo, Sony, the NBA. Like, I'd never heard that question before. But moreover, I literally could not answer that question when I heard it, so I just wrote it down. And I literally looked at that question for a full week. I'm like, who am I uninterrupted? If nothing stood in the way of me achieving my success, what would my life actually look like? If at every intersection of your life, the light isn't red, it's not yellow, it is only green, what would you build? And I think to answer that question, you also have to think through and reflect on, well, what interrupted you to begin with? And how do we carry that into pitch meetings and board meetings and conversations and team meetings, that interruption? I think that's a lot of where imposter syndrome, there's something or someone that said something to you that makes you doubt yourself every time you are ready to be audacious and step into new levels with your name on it. It's like, for me, that question has been such a powerful question. And when talking with Pharrell about like Black Ambition and where we want it to go, that was a question that was rooted in the ambition part of Black Ambition, right? Is like, where do we want to go? But more than anything, how do we create a space for Black and Latinx entrepreneurs where their pathway to entrepreneurship and their pathway to wealth through entrepreneurship is never interrupted again, as much as we humanly can make it possible. And that's the best way to explain what we're building at Black Ambition. And then we fund them, right? We mentor them. We had about 1,700 applications last year. We had over 2,000 this year. Through some amazing judges and interviewers and expert application evaluators, we get that down to about 249 entrepreneurs, and then we take them between a 3 to 5 month cohort, mentorship style cohort, over the course of those 3 to 5 months, and then from there we invest in about 10% of those companies. But a lot of those companies that don't necessarily make it from direct investment from our fund actually get investments from their mentors through Black Ambition. And then we connect them with strategic partners as well. And so, one of our companies, we connected them to a family that owned a Marriott in South Florida in the Aventura Mall. She creates organic feminine hygiene products. that corporations buy and then is provided to their offices for free, right, is kind of her model. And she's now in every Marriott location across the United States. And I say that because when we talk about people saying just keep your head down and working, or when we talk about mentorship and it's not the right level of mentorship, but more than anything, when we talk about access, y'all, that was 2 phone calls. Yeah. You get what I'm saying? Like, that was 2 phone calls. She was building something that was amazing, but literally could not get the distribution. But 2 wealthy people with access that just picked up the phone and trusted Black and brown entrepreneurs enough that they are solving massive problems. 2 phone calls led into national and will probably lead into international distribution of her product. That's life-changing. And so it's not as hard as we say it is. Entrepreneurship is not hard. I mean, diversity is not hard. Let me say that. Entrepreneurship is hard as all get out, yes. Right? But there's a power and a genius that each and every one of us has as a massive contributor and player in our ecosystem. And your ecosystem and the lifeblood of your ecosystem requires everyone to play their role. Yeah. And it's not always building a space like you've brilliantly built 2 amazing spaces that I cannot wait to check out. But sometimes it's literally just picking up the phone and leveraging your relationship and your connections to put somebody on. Like, that's it, yeah, right? We look at Livegistics. We invested $1 million in them. They've gone on to raise $6 million. They've gone from 4 employees to 34 employees in the span of less than a year, and they're a Detroit-based company, right? And so let me get off my preacher pulpit.
Stay up there.
But it was something that was hard for me to wrap my head around, how fast things can move when the right person knows about you, right? And so making sure people do radar work. And I know we were talking about like PR, right? And storytelling and narrative, and really everyone shouting from the mountaintops about what is happening here in the Twin Cities so that people and investors respect you enough to pick up the phone and then put money where it needs to be for the companies here to build a thriving ecosystem. And so there's a role that all of us can play in that role of storytelling at a minimum, but more than anything, like literally taking whatever your genius is, whatever your highest contribution is, and like literally sprinkling that into your ecosystem is how things really start to shift and move. And that's what we saw in Miami for sure.
I really hope our ecosystem partners in the audience and at home are really hearing the intentionality of the work that you do, because like you said, speed is of utmost importance to founders. We've got 6 to 12 months until we run out of money. So like we need it now. I've fundraised in the past. We're fundraising now. I think the challenge that we have is like heads down work doesn't bode well for trying to find the money work, you know? So you can't do both. And when you're trying to tell your money story and you're watching your, you're watching your money go down and you're like, well, I got to chase it over here. You can't put your own intentionality as a founder in the right space all the time. And so having ecosystem partners, other funders, corporate partners, advisors, people who can open up those doors quicker for you, trusting you without all of the rigmarole and the application process and the reporting and all of those things that are often required of our traditional ecosystems and philanthropy. What you're doing is revolutionary, and I hope that folks see that and really take that away and find ways to build intentionality into their work and community building into their work. Before we turn to Q&A, I have some questions around, founder insights and things like you've been a founder, so help us all get out of the shit. One of my favorite book titles of yours is Start Your Business on a Ramen Noodle Budget, and I truly had ramen noodles last week, so this felt really real for me. But how do you leverage your limited resources to get from launch to grow when you're not quite ready to raise funds yet, but you got to show some traction?
That book title was literally the story of me and Derek's life as entrepreneurs, right? For years. And so, like, the whole premise of that is, like, if you don't have money to, like, accelerate your growth, like, you still have other things that you can leverage, right? You leverage your leverage. And so sometimes that shows up in the form of, like, the social media, like, influence that you have and leveraging that for brand partnerships or to increase sales or to rapidly grow, like, your e-commerce business. It could show up as that, right? It's leveraging the connections that you have, right? People say your net worth is connected to your network or something like that. But you still got to work the network, you know what I mean? And make sure the network is of value and high value. Then it's like having a big ask. Like, ask for the things that you need. So many of us are so afraid of asking the people around us for the things that you need, and you'd be surprised. There's so many people waiting around to help you, but they sometimes don't know what the hell you do. My mom, to this day, cannot tell you what I do, like, at all. For a part of my life, I think she was ashamed. My mom's Jamaican, y'all, and so my brother was a stand-up comedian, and I was running a gourmet popsicle company. And my mom was just like,
what?
Where did I go wrong, right? Like, and she would literally tell her friends, I heard, like, yeah, I don't know what they're doing right now. They're doing something. I was like, Mom, like, you've literally been to our store. What do you mean? But, like, in my community, if you weren't, like, a banker, a nurse, a doctor, a lawyer, like, you've just wasted your life, right? Which is just crazy. I totally forgot the question.
No, I was saying, how do you leverage limited resources to get from launch to grow?
So going back to the abundance part, right? It's just like everything is centered around your mindset. Like, I cannot stress that enough. And I think we gloss over that because we think it must be this bigger, harder thing, right? The other part of that is having confidence in what you're building and know that you have something that you could, of value, that you can leverage that value. There's value and then there's perceived value. And at the end of the day, like, what's the root word of confidence? Y'all are brilliant people at Twin Cities Startup Week, right? What's Tech Week, huh?
Confide?
Confide, right, is the root word. And what does confide mean?
Tell someone about it?
Yeah. Someone's trust, right? And so confidence isn't this, like, Kanye West ego thing, right? And it's not bravado, it's trust. At the root of confidence means trust. Do you trust yourself? Do you trust what you're building? Do you trust your numbers? Do you trust your impact? Can you trust your process to sales and profitability? The root word of confidence, right? And confidence attracts the resources and the people that you need, because people, like, it's literally a magnetic force. And so, like, those are some of the things that I would recommend, right? And then going out to events like this and being a massive contributor to your ecosystem also plays a role, because all work works, right? The work is either going to work for you or it's going to work on you, but either way it works. And so you may be in a rut at that moment, and Derek and I have been in more ruts than I can ever begin to, like, account for, and things may not be going well, and you may have to pivot, or things are going really well, and you have to step into a new version of a leader that you are not mentally prepared to, and that's a challenge, right? Like, you've just received all the funding, you've closed your round. Now you have to be a different type of entrepreneur. Now you have a board that you need to respond to, right? You have stakeholders, you have all these things. That requires a different version of you than when you were hustling and fundraising. And all of those things are things that you can leverage for new opportunities, new conversations, if you always understand the value in which you have built and that you will continue to build. And that, again, goes from knowing exactly what you want, like knowing exactly what you want and putting that out there. And then, again, just really building. Like, I cannot stress enough building the relationships, right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, and having a really strong network, like you're saying, is so important, especially when you're becoming a new type of founder, right? So you have to be someone different from, maybe not someone at your core, but you have to your energy is different when you're working on the business versus when you're working in the business. And there's a lot there. I fully support therapy for all founders. If you can get it, check out Nice Healthcare if you're looking. They're local. They've got great work. They've obviously been on this stage before. Big plug for them. I want to turn it out and make sure that folks in the audience get a chance to ask questions. I have more, but open to anyone. Yes, Calvin.
All right, perfect. I'm a big fan of therapy as well. Sometimes in our community, there can be a stigma to it, but what are some of the things or kind of key takeaways you got out of it that you didn't get before that helped you in that next inflection point?
Quite a bit, right? And so one, it was definitely a new set of tools to handle very difficult conversations, right? Or to prepare for very difficult conversations. The difficult conversation that I was having with myself, right, was a big part of that. Then the difficult conversations, or the conversation I was avoiding is the real word, that I needed to have. I needed a new vocabulary in order to be able to do so. I needed a new level of courage to be able to do so. I also needed to get a better understanding of how I was self-sabotaging. And that wasn't even in relation to the transition. That was just, we do it, right? Gay Hendricks in the book, The Big Leap, he calls that upper limiting. And a lot of us deal with that, right? Like we've entered a level of success that we have never experienced before. And sometimes instead of leaning into that, what we do is start creating self-sabotaging practices to get back down to our comfort level, right? Or we think that we don't deserve the level of success that we have because maybe we've gotten it sooner than the rest of our team or our communities or our families, and we feel guilty with that power, and so it helped a lot with that as well. And I would say the other part is it helped with adding therapy to Black Ambition, and so we have therapists on staff through a program called Evoke for all of the entrepreneurs that we invest in as well, right? And I don't know how you build an entrepreneurship support program coming out of a global pandemic that isn't rooted in giving entrepreneurs new tools for self-care and mental health. Like, you're almost irresponsible if you're building a program that doesn't root that in there somewhere, right? A global pandemic. You think about, and my heart always breaks for the entrepreneur, and I know we kind of talked about that earlier, but like the entrepreneur that like betted the house, maybe cashed in on the 401k, finally said, I am going to do this, got rid of all the mental junk that stops you from taking the leap into entrepreneurship, only for all the worst case scenarios to happen in 2020. Yeah. Will they build companies again, right? Will they thrive? I have no idea. But like, we need to also make sure that they're mentally taken care of. And then the companies that did thrive or did survive during the pandemic, they're a different type of entrepreneur that also needs to be made whole. And so looking at entrepreneurship more holistically is definitely a responsibility that all ecosystems have, but those that are definitely in direct support of founders, you also need to do that, right? And then with respect to Black Ambition, it's all of that, but then it's also, we have founders, and I think we brush it off so much in this space, especially in the tech space, like, get to 100 no's. One no is really hard. Yeah. 5 no's are a punch in the gut. 100 no's, you may not ever get out the bed. And so do they have the tools to weather that storm until they get the yes? And if you were an investor, like it's a good return on your investment to make sure that your founders are supported and that type of level as well so that you can actually get your return, right? And so it's not bad business, it's a true investment into those founders, and it's a respectful investment. It's a human investment as well, in addition to team and like all these other things. But making sure that your founder is okay is something that is really important and something that we prioritize, but it's also something that came out of those therapy sessions, and then more than anything, it's what came out of like my experience with my husband. Like, our daughter, we had literally, our food company, we had literally split from our investors. I was 6 months pregnant, and then I went into labor early at 6 months. We had literally just closed our store 30 days before ending up in the hospital. And for 4 months, every day, the both of us were in a hospital and also fighting with our investors. And then my daughter weighed 1.4 pounds when she was born. She had a 1% life expectancy. And so when you talk about things punching you in the gut as an entrepreneur, I have no idea how my husband and I survived those first 2 years and also still being entrepreneurs. Like I pray, right? And it's only but God, and I'm just saying that for me personally, that I know made us through that, but it's also how we weather storms as entrepreneurs, but that was probably the biggest storm. For 2 years, 7 special, like I couldn't work. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, and these are the things that are happening to entrepreneurs. Like I'll never forget a founder that wanted to get into one of the big 3 accelerators. I won't say who it is. And I remember calling him. I was just like, you applied twice and you couldn't get in. And we have him literally, the CEO literally speaking at Black Tech Week, like, where are you? Where are you? Where are you? And he finally texted me back. He said, Felecia, my daughter was just diagnosed with cancer. Like everything in me wants to be there because I know that that could be transformational, but I can't even be there for anyone else but her and my wife right now. Yeah. And these are real realities, and there's everything else under the spectrum of that entrepreneurs go through. And then as you talk about entrepreneurs of color, then you talk about the racial BS, right? The trauma that comes with seeing murders happening on TV every single day, and then you got to get back up and smile like nothing happens, and no one says anything, no one holds space for that moment. Like, these are the realities of entrepreneurs, but definitely the realities of entrepreneurs of color. And so we just have to be much more respectful and intentional about the ecosystems that we're building, because we're talking about humans that can do mighty things, but that also go through really hard things. And so having a level of grace and patience is important, but then also the grind is also equally important. And I tell those stories because I remember one of the founders with the Center for Black Innovation that went through that accelerator. Like, I just remember her talking about, she was just like, the pandemic is hard, but it's not my rock bottom. She's like, I went through and weathered worse storms that actually prepared me to thrive in this moment. And so when we talk about Black entrepreneurs, especially in like the 40% of those that have closed and will not reopen because of the pandemic, I was like, that's a very important data set that we need to address. But no one's talking about the 60% that survived. And that we're equipped to survive what should have broken them as well. And so we have to find supports and interventions for both of those groups.
Oh, that's so important to remember the whole human. I think we forget about that when we talk about, Twin Cities Startup Week. We're talking about founders and entrepreneurs and the companies that they built, but we forget about soccer practice and making dinner at home and, trauma with family and taking care of an ill parent. All of those things are things we all do, and we do it challengingly, we do it tiredly, we do it in the middle of the night and first thing in the morning. We just do it. And I also love what you said about like getting to 100 no's is like kind of a bullshit, exciting thing that founders get to do. No, like we pitched 300 investors in 2019, heard 13 yeses, but I only remember the no's. And I remember feeling so, down about that. And then after closing that round, closing my spaces for 4 months because of the pandemic, and then George Floyd being murdered in our backyards in the Twin Cities. And so we're all going through it. I think many of us founders don't even get a chance to process some of these traumatic moments that happen to us until it's too late, or until somebody says, hey, are you okay? And so encouraging everybody to check in on one another, because therapy isn't accessible to everybody. And so if there are founders in your life who need connective moments, like check in on them. The ecosystem is here to support them. One time for one more question before we close. Yes, Tatiana.
I just want to thank you for speaking to the callous of struggle. I think that's part of what makes founders of color more resilient. But I'm curious to know, what self-conversations should you be having when you're being rejected, when you're living life, when you're pitching yourself to people with millions of dollars? What are you talking to yourself about on a daily basis?
A few things. I would say, you got this. Like, you really got this. Some of my conversations, like, their loss, right? Like, that's your loss. You will be back, and it'll be more expensive, right? Like, sometimes it's that. A friend of mine taught me this thing of just like looking in the mirror every morning and saying, you are what a wealthy woman looks like. And just saying that over and over again. And for financial wealth, of course, but like health wealth, right? Like CEO wealth, team wealth, family wealth, like literally just saying that to yourself as you wake up. Men, y'all can do that too, right? Like everyone can do that as well. But literally starting the day, kind of building your armor up, right, is a thing. Like I know we talked about like preparing yourself for like the fight and the conflict, right? But then also joy, like prioritize joy. If you have a big win, like celebrate, like really take the time to celebrate the big win. And I'm not saying go on a 5-week vacation in Cabo, but like, what is the one thing that you can do to just pause and say, I'm literally standing or sitting in impossibility in this moment? Because at one point of time, while building this thing or coming up with this idea or building this dream or trying to attract this person to the company, I thought that this moment was impossible. And I'm now literally sitting in what I thought was impossible, and that moves to possibility. And so we have to take moments to just stop and say, I am here in this moment that I thought I would never be in, and like sit and celebrate that, and then go back out into the world. But it's a lot of those things. And I would say the other thing that has really helped me is just kind of like around abundance again, is a conversation I had with my mentor that I like to share. And the pie is big enough for everyone to get a slice person, right? And I was saying that to him, he was like, no, Felecia, the pie is not big enough for everyone to get a slice. Because he's like, when you eat your slice of the pie, that's it, right? He's like, what you need to be striving to do is eat from the garden. Because when you eat from the garden, at the end of you consuming your fruit from the garden, there are seeds. And so your consumption actually produces more for other people so that you are well fed. Because I think if we're not careful, especially in the philanthropic space, but in ecosystem building, like, how do I say this? Like, there's this badge for how hard you've struggled. And that's unfortunate because you're building something so that you are well fed. You're building something so that your team is well fed. You're building something so that your community is well fed. But you have to be well fed too. But if you strive to eat from the garden and not look at crabs in a barrel or like this limiting belief of like, you get your slice of the pie, like if I eat from the garden, when I plant those more seeds, it creates other opportunities for everyone else to eat. And it allows us to think much more expansive about what we're building. It allows us to be more collaborative and not competitive against each other or pitting ourselves against each other when we realize that all of us can eat from a really abundant space and create more opportunities for others. And that's what I want for Minneapolis more than anything, especially someone who's lived here, right? Like the first step of learning how to build community came from living here, right? When I remember my husband was working at Target. I moved to Minneapolis for love. It didn't keep me that warm, but I still love you.
You're not the only one.
Right? And I remember being frustrated because I worked at CBS Radio to begin with, and I used to be so jealous of like all these groups that Target had, like this and that. I was just like, and my husband said something to me. He was just like, just build the community that you want. And so like I launched like a meetup group, and we would meet at what is the museum in Minneapolis?
The Walker?
The Walker Museum, and like we would do all these meetups, and like that was before Code Fever, Black Tech Week, like all these things. It was my husband saying, you can either be frustrated and not be happy living here, or you can build something and then bring the people that you want to hang out with and make friends. You build community, right? So I owe Minneapolis that because it taught me that lesson of how to build the thing, how to build an ecosystem for yourself, And then it also is supportive of others. Like that is the best lesson that I learned being here, but like, and how to survive negative 32-degree wind chills.
Well, if you know anything about folks from the Twin Cities, it's that we'll claim you if you've even stepped one foot here. So you're a Minnesotan now. Thank you. I do want to ask one final question. I love the positioning around abundance, and we're all rooting for you. So what do you believe your legacy is?
What is my legacy? Ooh. I'm sitting in it right now. Like, I really am, right? And so, being able to fund entrepreneurs and brilliant, brilliant people that we fund for-profit companies, but there's a social impact soul to all of those companies. And so knowing that, like, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, the world is going to be different based off of the work that they're doing today, based off of the work that I'm doing, our organization's doing today, like, that is it. And then I would say the last part of that is being, we talk about ROI in this space a lot, right? Return on investment. What we don't talk enough about is return on sacrifice. And I believe my legacy is being a massive return on my ancestors' sacrifice. I'm the granddaughter of a Jamaican sugarcane farmer. You know what I mean? And so it's that, right? I think of my husband's family, like some of his family still lives on sharecropping farms, right? Like, we're not that far removed from segregation, you know what I mean? And so, like, being a return on all of their sacrifices to have the honor and the privilege to be able to fund companies in the way that we can that are going to have a massive impact on the world, like, this is purpose work for me right now. It's definitely legacy work. And then just being a financially transformational for my personal family. That's the legacy that I want to have, because we know what that means for the trajectory of everything moving forward.
Wow. Well, you are your ancestors' wildest dreams, and I thank you so much for sharing your insights. This was like an Oprah Super Soul Sunday moment. It really was.
You get a card. No,
yeah. You look under your chairs. Just kidding. Don't. There's nothing there. I hope you all had such an amazing time. Thank you so much to Felecia
Thank
for spending time
you for everything
with us.
that you do and who you are as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your Twin Cities Startup Week, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.